We're now going to start on the audio portion, the second half of our project. You'll remember I created this color folder, and that's sort of a master folder for both projects. The full spectrum project was just working with color, varying color intensity, and also varying time on screen so that the delivery of images would increase and decrease pace. We're now adding sound, and this half of the project is called Aural Soundscape. And you'll notice I've given them separate projects, and I created an images folder out here so that they could each access that folder in common. Typically, you'd create a project folder and all your assets would be inside those project folders, organized into subfolders. I could normally, as I've done here, I've created a new project and it's got its own autosave folder. It's also got a soundtrack called Dreams in there. But you don't necessarily have to create a new project. You can do so, it doesn't matter. However, I just wanted to show you another way of doing it. Now here's the first half of the project, and if I just open that up, I'm just going to get rid of this extra one here. I'm going to open that project up. And as you might recall, we stitch together assets or edit them together using a thing called a sequence. And a sequence is really nothing more than an edit list. It's a list that says what asset is going where and for how long in a timeline. Now it also specifies other things such as transitions between these assets. And when I say assets, I mean it can be a still image, as is the case here. It can also be a video clip. It can be an audio clip. It can also be text and other graphics. So you'll notice this is our previous project. You can see there's the sequence. Remember, the iconography is telling us that this is a sequence because this symbolizes the timeline against which all the snippets are organized. And this is an image or a piece of video, and you'll notice we've also got a graphic. I created a yellow card as a background. That's where I put my titles in the previous version of this project. Now you can see the timeline here for the previous sequence, and it was called Sequence 01 right here. We can scrub through that. Instead of creating a new project, we can work within this project and create another new sequence. Using the same assets, we can access all of these assets here and edit them together in a different order. That's essentially what sequences are. So let's do that. Down here under New Item, we're going to make a new sequence. And I'll call this sequence Full Spectrum Edit. I'm going to use AVC HD, and I'm also going to use 720p at 30 frames a second, simply to keep the file sizes down and keep my editing a lot more efficient. Typically, you would be doing this at 1080p. Click OK. Notice the timeline went blank because this is a new sequence. It's awaiting me to give it orders as to what images I want to use and in what order. Now because this is based on sound, we want the sound to really act as the backbone for the entire piece. It really is the thing that stitches all the images together and gives them continuity and gives them audio cues as to where they're going to be on the timeline. So let me bring in my audio. My new sequence, which is blank right now, has been generated. So to bring this in, just double click anywhere in a blank area in your project window, and now I have to locate my audio file. There it is in my Aural Soundscape folder. Select that, import it, and this is what I'm going to drop in to my timeline. This is going to determine the heartbeat of my video. We'll start with the same image as I had the last time. The difference being where it comes in will be determined by the audio signature. So let's make this a little bit larger so we can see what's going on. Maybe zoom in a little bit more to my timeline so I can actually see the beats structured there in that audio channel. Just want to make sure I scrub all the way back, and let's have a listen to that. And you can hear that snapping sound. I'm going to want to put some of the images in at those points in the audio signature. We're using very high resolution images. In order for the computer to serve those things up, it's very taxing on the system memory. And so oftentimes the presentation of the images will appear as if they haven't lined up correctly with the audio signature. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add markers. I'm going to listen to the sounds. Also, I'm going to look at these beats here, and I'm going to listen to those sounds. So I've really zoomed in. You can see the audio signature, and you can see that there's a snap right there, wherever there's a peak. I'm going to want to move my playhead to that position, and what I found is if you put it just a little bit ahead and you use this as the marker for where the image is going to drop in, it seems to sync up just a little bit better. It just gives the image a little bit of lead time to load in alongside the audio track. In order to help me with this, I'm going to use things called markers. If I hold down the control key and click, I can say add marker. And it adds a marker on my timeline right here. And if I double click that, I can change its color. I'm just going to make the color red, just so it's a little bit easier to see. I could actually mark directly on the clip instead of the timeline. Click here, and then if I did the same thing again, I would be adding a mark on the actual clip itself. I'm just going to keep them on the timeline. Scroll down. I heard that click again. I may want to zoom out just a little bit. So it seems like there's another one here, right there at that peak. So just move it there, control click, and I'm just going to add another marker there. Oh, you'll notice because I had the clip selected, it added the marker in there. I'm just going to do Command Z, deselect the clip, just so they stay up here on the actual timeline. Control, add marker. There it is. Double click it. I can give it another color. Hit return. There's another click. Again, control, add a marker. Another one there. And you can more or less see from the audio signature where these clicks are occurring. And I'm just going to continue that just for a little bit. Now we've got some beats coming in, you can hear that. So we'll want things to happen there as well. Move the playhead over here, do the same thing. And I'll continue this process to the end. The next thing I want to do is, using these markers along here as reference, I want to drag in my assets. So there's the first asset. I'll drag that in, and I won't have any image appear until we actually see a sound signature. So there's going to be an area at the beginning where it's blank. I want to make sure I scale this down a little bit so it's just a little bit more manageable for me. Scale it down to there, drag it in over here, and then scale it back to where it matches that first marker. And as I stretch that back, it kind of locks in. You see a little triangle appear underneath the marker, just telling us that it's now aligned. So we've got our first image in there. We've got to be mindful of the fact that if we're going to affect controls, these are very large images. We may need to scale those up or down. And I already had that one scaled down, so I'm good to go with that. But just be mindful of that, because the images were very high resolution to begin with. So I'm going to bring in my next image. Again, just make it a bit shorter. Drag it into position. And I'm going to scale that back until it meets that second marker. There's my second marker. Select it. scale it if necessary. Don't have any letterboxing in the left, right, top, or bottom. Just make sure it fits nicely. And again, we've got it on the marker. I'm going to bring in my next asset. Just drag it into position. Move the playhead over it. Keep in mind, the playhead has to be over the image, and the asset, the image, has to be selected in order to scale it. Just take that down to there. And again, I want to make sure it's on the marker. I'm just going to scale that back to there. Good. And I'll just continue that process until I've got the entire thing marked up along the beats. And now you'll notice the beats of the music are getting a little more rapid. We can tell this because the clips are shortening. And again, move that over, ensure proper scaling. So this is one that I'm going to not only scale, but I'm also going to change its position slightly. So I'm going to use the X position just to drag that down a bit, like that. And right back to here. Move the playhead over so we can see it, select the image, and perform the scaling. And I would just repeat this process until I got to the very end. But let's just preview what we have. So I'm just going to jump to the end point of our video and let's preview. You can see now how it's synchronizing with the sound. And that's essentially what you want to do all the way through until you have the finished piece. I'm now going to add another layer of sound into my production. And for this, I've gone to freesound.org. And you can do this as well and set up an account. And there's an amazing range of different sounds that you can access here, whether it's instrumental or environmental sounds. I was looking for environmental sounds to layer in on top of my imagery. And I've collected them all here in my folder. You can see I've created another folder here called Sounds. I've got sound of bees, heavy rain, a Tibetan chant, and traffic in the rain. So let me just open up my project now, and we'll look back on where there are opportunities for adding in these layered sounds. And so I just want to take it all back to the beginning here and scrub through and look for moments where I might be able to bring things in. Okay, so we've got a flower here. This might be a good time to bring in the sound of a meadow and some bees. First, I need to bring my sounds in, and the only one I have so far is my soundtrack down here called Dreams. I'm just going to double click on a blank area, and I'm going to locate my sounds folder. There it is. Select them all, just hold the shift key down and import. My new sounds are in here. I'll locate my bees sound. I'll drag that in here. I'm just going to scale that down. I'm going to bring it into audio track 2. So there it is. You can have a listen to that. Okay, so you have the sound of the bees in there. I want that layering in over top of that flower. So I'll just mark the start. Move the bees sound over here. I'm not going to need the rest of it, so I'll just use my razor tool here. And I'll cut the bees sound. Delete the excess. And I really want the sound of the bees to come in and come out, like fade in and fade out. you'll notice how it has ducked the audio in that region. This is an issue for us because it's allowing this to dominate this. So I'm just going to do Command Z until we're right back here. Okay, so I've got to be mindful of that. Just moving it in here into position. Use my razor tool right here. Select that and delete it. And what it was doing there was what's called auto ducking. It was just minimizing the gain or the overall master volume of one track to allow another track to play. I want them more or less having equal gain, and I'll do the audio adjustments myself. So remember, to do the audio adjustments, you need to select the track, and then you would go to Effect Controls up here, and at this point I would use Levels. Now remember, this happens over time. So let me move to the beginning of my clip, and I want to put in a levels adjustment right at the beginning. I would click that, and it drops in a diamond here, or a keyframe at that point. I just want to move in shortly after that. Let me zoom in a little bit so we can see more of our sound signature. A little bit of the way in, I want to put another marker, say right about there. And again, I can just click here to add a keyframe. So there's the second diamond or keyframe. Now this is our volume, our levels control. I can work here, or I could work directly on the sound clip itself. And what I want to happen is for the very first part of the music to drop down to 0, so that it comes in from nothing and then quickly ramps up to full volume. If I control click on this, I can use Bezier, which allows me to bend this curve. So it's a more gradual transition up to full volume. I want to do the same thing on the other side. So again, move my playhead towards the end. I'll put a marker in there. So add a keyframe. And you can see it over here. It's doing the same thing. And it's got a Bezier on it. I'm just going to move a little bit in from there. Add another keyframe. And now I can adjust these Bezier curves. I'm just going to do it down here. If I zoom right in, I can see the curves. Select it and just manipulate that curvature. And then if I move in here, let's just zoom even further, I can move this point down here. Now, like I said, we could do that same thing over here and select our points here. I can move this down now. Just move that all the way down. I want to get sort of like an S curve. Lower this curve down so it's flattened, and that should bring our audio in. This is the profile of the sound. Let's listen to how that comes in. We could hear the sounds of the bees come in. Now it might help to duck the other audio channel just a little bit so that during these same transitions the sound's not as powerful, the sound track. Move my playhead to here. I would select that track, make sure it's highlighted, and then I would add a point in there, move over just a little bit, add another keyframe in there, and then towards the end, add a keyframe in there, Come back a little bit and add a keyframe in there. If I just zoom in a little bit, we can see the keyframes. I created 2 on either side for a levels adjustment. So what this allows me to do on here, if I edit on this timeline, or I suppose if I edit on this one, I can just bring them down, all the way down. I don't want it completely out of the equation, so let me bring it down to about the midpoint, right about here. And likewise, I'm going to do that same thing over here. I'll make these 2 Beziers, so Control click, Bezier, and this allows me to give them curvature. Bezier here, and we'll just give that some curvature. So we should hear the sound of the music duck under the sound of the bees. That's probably a little bit too much. So again, I can make adjustments until I get it to the level that I require. So I'm just kind of using a U-curve scenario here. And then we come back up to full sound. Let's listen to that. The music diminishes so that we can hear the bees. And then it's back up to normal again. We will continue layering these things in. I'm just going to select that image. It looks like it needs to be scaled. I'm ready to continue that process. So I'm going to find my rain image. We've got a few here. A sequence where we have these lanterns. Then we have this walkway. And then we have this other walkway. And these are heavily Asian in influence, and so I've also got a sound of Buddhist monks chanting. So I think maybe I'll give that a shot. I'll bring that in. Just going to zoom that out. And you'll notice that that soundtrack doesn't start until about here. So I'm going to use my razor tool. Click down here, selection tool, select, and then if I hit delete, I can just move this over here. And let's see if we play that over those images. You can see our 2 soundtracks there. Just making them smaller so we can see them both, one on top of the other. Going to roll it back here a little bit. That came in a little bit too early. It didn't quite sync up, but I think that's more of a buffering issue right now. And I like it running right to about there. I would clip that with my razor tool. So I'll use my razor tool, cut it there, select that, and delete. I would do the same thing with the in and out points. I'll come here. There seems like there's just a natural transition. You can see it in the sound wave itself. It slowly fades in. So I don't really need to do anything with that, but I may have to fade it out on the back end. And here on the back end, you would notice it ends very abruptly. Look at the sound signature. It's like falling off a cliff. So this is where I'd probably have to bring this in, right here, select this audio clip. I want to use levels and do an adjustment. I'll put a keyframe there. I'll move here, drop in another keyframe, and then I can select the first keyframe and move it all the way down to 0. Just here. Dropping it all the way down, and then on this one, Control, I can make that a Bezier. And give it that smoother profile as it drops to 0. As far as my music is concerned, I can select that audio clip, put a keyframe in there, move over here a little bit, put another keyframe in, then over towards the beginning of that Buddhist chant, put a keyframe in there, move along a little bit, put another keyframe there. And then of course what I want to do is move these keyframes down. So I'm ducking the volume, as it's called. Control, Bezier, and that's giving me curvature. Getting a bit of an S bend there. Control, Bezier, and again making that transition more gradual. And we'll see how that appears. The sound goes far too low in the ducking process, so let me just bring it back up, make it a bit more gradual. We'll bring this up here as well. So just less of a drop or duck. Yeah. Maybe even bring the volume of the Buddhist chanting down just a little bit. But at any rate, you can see as we go through this process, we're creating layers, kind of like a birthday cake. One layer of sound on top of the other. And this helps to create depth and mood and makes the piece more immersive because there are environmental sounds consistent with the imagery. So it helps to take us to that place. That said, it can often be really jarring. That's why I'm using the Bezier function to make it as gradual as possible. Now, these cuts that I'm using are fairly short, so the layered environmental sounds are just popping in very quickly. It would probably be more effective, in my opinion, if the clips were longer. We saw the image on screen for a sustained period of time, and then that would give us a little bit more wiggle room in terms of playing with the audio and its levels. But it is what it is. We're working with what we have, and we're just trying to create that layering effect. And I would just continue on with that, looking for opportunities to bring environmental sounds in on top of our soundtrack. The soundtrack needs to run continuously beginning to end because that's the backbone. It's what gives us continuity in the narrative all the way through. And so we never want to diminish the soundtrack to the point where we cannot hear it. It needs to be there as a sort of heartbeat for the series of visuals that we're presenting. And the environmental sounds like the bees and the Buddhist chants can come and go as the imagery requires. So I'm going to continue with this until I'm done. As you can see, I've got my entire project finished. I've synced up all of my clips to the beats in the music. You can see them. The ends correlate to the spikes in the sound signature. And I finished it all the way to the end. I've thrown in my title card at the end, and I've also added in my layers of environmental sounds with various sound profiles where I'm ducking the volume on the main soundtrack, or I'm boosting the volume, bringing it in gradually, and boosting the volume on the extra environmental sounds. So I've got it all set together. I've previewed it. Now I need to select them all. So I just drag across there. They're now all active. And now I can go to File, Export, Media. I want to give it a name. So I'll name it up here. And I'll just keep this Full Spectrum Edit. And then I'll click on this link here to determine where I'm going to save it. And I would save it in the color folder. And this is my Aural Soundscape. So I would save my final video in there, and it would start the export process. In this export window, this is showing you the entire range of clips. Even at this point, you could select a small portion of that and set for yourself in and out points and only export a portion of the overall sequence that you've edited together. I've already exported this out. It's now in my folder. If I open it up here, open up my Aural Soundscape folder, you can see my final video.